Hello, this is Susie Newhan, and this is the second in our series on linear functions. This is the one about learning to recognize what's the gradient and what's the intercept from the equation of the function. So remember our supply function from the previous video? Technically, it is an inverse supply function, just because of the way I've shown it, but more on that later. It's a peculiarity of economists that they mess around with axes. All right, so here's the equation of our very simple linear function. Those of you that went to school in Britain, and hopefully a lot of you that didn't, will have learnt at school that the formula of a straight line graph always looks something like this. So I'm hoping this is just quick revision from many of you. Mx plus c. We learned that the c stood for constant, i.e. that number that stays the same no matter what happens to the x value. It's truly a constant. But we also learned it was called the intercept because it had a very important role in the equation. It shows us where it crosses this vertical axis. We used to call it the y-intercept at school because that was almost always the y-axis. And we also learnt that this was the gradient. Now, gradients are really important for economists, and we'll come to that later. And so we learned that whenever we saw an equation of a straight line, we would sort of compare it with this basic format and then be able to read it. So, for instance, we've got our p equals 2q plus 3. We can see just by looking that this is going to cross the vertical axis at 3. It just is. And why is that? That's because at that point q is 0. And if we substitute q0 in, 2 times 0 is 0. It becomes 3. So the equation always gives us that, but also we recognize from its position in the formula. And so we can also see here that 2 is the gradient. So what is gradient? Gradient is a measure of steepness. Economists often refer to it as the slope. So this is a steeper gradient. This is a less steep gradient. And the size of the gradient is indicated by the size of the number in front of the q. So we think of this as the coefficient of q, fancy maths name for meaning the number multiplied by q or x, whatever the variable is. And so the bigger that number, the steeper it is. Now, economists, and you're about to become one, so economists are awkward beings at times. So economists are more likely to write this equation as this. So the other way round from the way we used to do it at school, but it really doesn't matter at all. So we just have to be ready to recognize that this is the constant or the intercept. This is the gradient. Now that's important because some people learn the first bit is the gradient, the second bit is the intercept. You can see that that's fraught with danger when it comes to economics. So just learn the number multiplied by the variable is the gradient. The number all on its own is the intercept, where it's going to cross that axis. But what if we had a function like this? Well, no problem. We can still see that it has an intercept of 30, which means I can sketch it. Here's 30. But the gradient is negative. So instead of going up from a starting point, it's coming down. So that might be off the camera. It comes down like that. So instead of going up from that point, if it's negative, it goes down. This is a demand function, by the way. Something you'll recognize very easily later. Okay, so that's all I want you to get today, really, is this is the gradient, that's the intercept. intercept, gradient, and don't ignore the minors. Okay, so here's some questions for you to have a go yourself. A list of functions. For each, identify which is the gradient, which is the intercept. Freeze frame, give it a try, and then I'll put the answers up. So good luck.